The rain fell in gentle, rhythmic whispers against the glass, each droplet tracing the faint outline of the night. Somewhere in the heart of Shanghai, where the city never truly sleeps, Xiao Zhan stood by a window. His reflection blurred, his eyes distant, like a man searching for something that no longer existed. Or maybe something that never truly left. His studio was filled with unfinished canvases, splashes of colors, fragments of faces, and pieces of moments he could no longer recall completely. Every brushstroke was a memory fighting to be reborn. Somewhere between the lines of art and time, one face kept haunting him, a face that felt like sunlight and storm all at once. Across the city, under the hum of neon lights and the muted roar of engines, Wang Yibo was racing through the rain. The city lights bled into streaks of gold and crimson on his helmet visor, reflecting a world that felt both alive and lonely. He didn't know why he kept riding at this hour, or why every turn brought flashes of laughter, a hand he once held, and a name that echoed in his heart like a forgotten melody. He didn't remember everything, but he remembered feeling. And sometimes feeling is stronger than memory. The story began years ago, under a sky painted with youth and dreams. Xiao Zhan was an artist who believed in emotions before logic. His world built on colors, poetry, and moments that made life breathe. Wang Yibo was the opposite, a dancer and racer who believed in speed, precision, and focus. Yet, when they met on the set of an art exhibit collaboration, something in the universe shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fireworks. It was quiet, like two puzzle pieces finally realizing they fit. Their first conversation happened over spilled coffee. Xiao Zhan had been sketching, lost in his world, and Yibo, distracted by his phone, accidentally bumped into him. The coffee splashed across Xiao Zhan's drawing, smearing what looked like a stormy ocean. "Sorry," Yibo muttered, his tone brisk but his eyes warm. Xiao Zhan just smiled. "It's okay. Maybe the painting needed a bit of chaos." From that day on, chaos became beautiful. They spent nights in small cafes, arguing about art and racing, laughing about life's unpredictability. Yibo taught Xiao Zhan to live faster, to take risks. Xiao Zhan taught Yibo to slow down, to breathe, to see beauty in stillness. But the universe, as always, had its own plans. A year later, a sudden accident changed everything. Yibo's motorcycle crashed during a night race, lights flashing, metal twisting, and time freezing. He survived, but his memory didn't. The doctors said it was selective amnesia, fragments of his past sealed away like a locked diary. Xiao Zhan waited by his hospital bed for days, weeks even, whispering stories of their shared laughter, their dreams, their quiet moments under the stars. But Yibo looked at him as if he were a stranger. And that broke him. Months passed. Xiao Zhan disappeared from the public eye. His paintings grew darker, filled with sharp edges and broken reflections. Every piece looked like a soul trying to remember what love felt like. The art world called it his fragment era. They said he was reinventing his style, but only he knew the truth. He wasn't reinventing anything. He was remembering. One evening, as he showcased his newest piece, an unfinished painting of two figures reaching for each other across shattered glass, he felt someone standing behind him. "Why didn't you finish it?" a familiar voice asked. Xiao Zhan froze. That voice, it couldn't be. When he turned, he saw Yibo. He looked different now, older, colder, but his eyes still carried that same glimmer, like a fire refusing to die. "It didn't feel right to finish," Xiao Zhan said softly. "Some stories aren't meant to end." Yibo looked at the painting again. "But maybe some stories deserve another beginning." And in that moment, Xiao Zhan realized that the universe was giving him back what it had once stolen. They started seeing each other again, awkwardly at first. Yibo didn't remember their past, but he was drawn to Xiao Zhan in ways that defied reason. He'd find excuses to visit his studio, asking about colors, brushes, techniques. Xiao Zhan would quietly guide him, his voice trembling at times, his heart torn between hope and fear. One evening, Yibo found an old sketchbook in Xiao Zhan's studio. Inside were drawings of him, every smile, every tilt of his head, every memory frozen in ink. He looked up, confusion and emotion swirling in his eyes. "These are all me." Xiao Zhan nodded slowly. "They're fragments of us. Pieces of what we were." Yibo turned the pages, his breath uneven. Each drawing seemed to stir something deep within him. Flashes of laughter, warmth, a shared look under the rain. His hands trembled. "Why does it hurt when I see these?" "Because," Xiao Zhan whispered, "your heart remembers what your mind forgot." That night, Yibo left without another word. But the next day he came back. And this time he didn't ask questions. He just watched Xiao Zhan paint, his eyes softening with every stroke. One evening the studio lights flickered, and rain began to fall again. Soft, steady, familiar. Xiao Zhan stood by the window, watching the city shimmer. Yibo came up behind him, his voice barely a breath. "I remembered something," he said. Xiao Zhan turned slowly. "What did you remember?" Yibo's gaze held both pain and peace. "You were crying. And I said I'd never let you cry again. But I did." Xiao Zhan's lips trembled. "It wasn't your fault." Yibo shook his head. "Maybe not. But I want to make it right this time." He stepped closer, his hand reaching up to brush away a tear from Xiao Zhan's cheek. It was a simple touch, but it felt like the world was stitching itself back together. The rain outside grew heavier, but neither of them moved. They stood there, two souls who had lost each other and somehow found their way back, not through memory but through love. Days turned into weeks. Xiao Zhan's new paintings began to change. Colors softening, light returning. He painted joy again, hope again, them again. Yibo started racing less and dancing more, rediscovering the rhythm he'd once shared with Xiao Zhan. Together they built something fragile yet real, a second chance. But life, as always, tested them once more. A major art critic visited Xiao Zhan's studio, offering him a solo exhibition in Paris. It was his dream, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But the dates clashed with Yibo's return to competitive racing. Two paths, two futures, one choice. "I think you should go," Yibo said, forcing a smile. "And miss your comeback." Xiao Zhan replied softly. "We've only just found each other again." Yibo's eyes glimmered. "Then that's how I'll win, knowing you're painting under the same sky, believing in me." And so they parted again, not out of pain but purpose. When Xiao Zhan stood in Paris surrounded by his paintings, their story told in colors and fragments, he realized that love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting each other grow. And that's what they did. Months later, back in Shanghai, Yibo stood in front of a gallery, looking at the final painting from Xiao Zhan's Paris collection. It was titled Fragments of Us. Two figures stood on opposite sides of a mirror, reaching out, their fingertips almost touching, but this time the mirror wasn't shattered. It was whole. The city never sleeps, but tonight, Shanghai felt quieter than usual, its rhythm softer, as though it too was listening to the storm that brewed in Xiao Zhan's heart. The studio lights painted golden halos across the room, reflecting off the glass jars of paint, unfinished canvases, and the man standing still before them, lost in his own silence. Xiao Zhan's fingers were stained with blue and silver, colors he used whenever he painted memories. Only, these weren't ordinary memories. They were echoes, shards of something precious that had slipped through his fingers long ago. The more he painted, the more vivid the fragments became, until one face kept reappearing in every stroke. A young man with a fierce gaze, a crooked smile, and a laugh that used to make the world feel brighter. Yibo. Even saying the name felt like exhaling pain. It had been months, no years, since the accident. Years since Yibo had looked at him and seen not the love of his life, but a stranger. Xiao Zhan had told himself 1,000 times to move on, but love doesn't obey logic. It lingers. Wait. It bleeds in silence. Outside, thunder rolled softly, and rain began to tap against the windows. Steady, rhythmic, familiar. Xiao Zhan closed his eyes, remembering that same sound from a night long ago, when everything between them had begun. It was a stormy night, much like this one. The art gallery was nearly empty, its silence filled only by the soft hum of the rain and the muted glow of city lights. Xiao Zhan had been working on a painting that refused to come alive. No matter how much color he poured onto the canvas, it stayed lifeless, like a song missing its melody. Then suddenly a crash. A door had flung open, followed by hurried footsteps and a voice calling out apologies. Xiao Zhan turned, startled, and saw him. Yibo, dripping wet, helmet in hand, and eyes flashing with mischief. He looked like a storm wrapped in human form. "I'm sorry," Yibo said with that low, rough voice. "I was trying to escape the rain. Didn't know anyone was still here." "You picked an art gallery for shelter?" Xiao Zhan asked, half amused. Ba grinned. "Better than under a bridge." Something about his grin, his boldness, made Xiao Zhan laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks. He offered Yibo a towel, and in that small, quiet act, something shifted between them. Minutes turned to hours as they talked about everything. Dreams, fears, colors, speed, chaos. Xiao Zhan spoke about how painting was like breathing, how every shade of blue carried emotion. Yibo countered with his love for the racetrack, the feeling of wind slicing past him, the blur of lights and adrenaline. "You paint emotions," Yibo said. "I chase them." And from that moment they were no longer strangers. They started meeting often after that. At cafes, art shows, racetracks. Their worlds were different, yet somehow they understood each other better than anyone else ever had. Xiao Zhan found peace in Yibo's chaos, and Yibo found purpose in Xiao Zhan's calm. One evening, they stood on a rooftop overlooking the glowing skyline. The wind tousled Yibo's hair as he turned to Xiao Zhan and asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like you've met someone in another life?" Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But I don't think it matters if it's another life. What matters is we found each other in this one." It was such a simple sentence, yet it stayed with Yibo long after that night. Then came the day everything changed. The racetrack glimmered under the sun, engines roaring, crowd cheering. Yibo, in his element, looked invincible. Xiao Zhan watched from the sidelines, his heart in his throat, proud yet terrified. But in a split second, a turn too sharp, a flash too fast, everything blurred. The crash echoed across the field. Screams followed. When Xiao Zhan reached him, Yibo lay unconscious, blood mixing with dust and oil. Xiao Zhan held his hand, whispering, "Don't you dare leave me." He didn't. But when Yibo woke, his world had reset. He looked at Xiao Zhan. His eyes cold, searching, confused. "Who are you?" That single question shattered Xiao Zhan's entire existence. The months that followed were cruel. Xiao Zhan tried everything. Photos, stories, places that once held their laughter, but nothing brought the memories back. Yibo was polite but distant, like someone looking at a faded photograph of himself. "I feel like I should remember," Yibo had said once, his voice trembling. "But it's like standing in front of a door I can't open." Xiao Zhan smiled through tears. "Then I'll wait by that door." But waiting hurt. Every day felt like losing him all over again. And yet, Xiao Zhan couldn't walk away. Because even if Yibo had forgotten their past, Xiao Zhan could still feel the love that lingered in Yibo's eyes when he wasn't looking. The small gestures, the way his voice softened around him, the quiet way his presence still made everything feel right. One afternoon, Yibo showed up at Xiao Zhan's studio unexpectedly. He stood before one of the paintings, a storm of blue and silver, two figures intertwined, surrounded by shattered glass. "It's beautiful," Yibo murmured. "But why do they look sad?" Xiao Zhan hesitated, his voice barely audible. "Because they're trying to remember each other." Yibo turned to him, something flickering in his gaze, something that felt like recognition. "It feels familiar." Xiao Zhan's heart skipped. "Maybe it's because it's us." Yibo froze. His breath hitched. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and fragile. Then quietly he said, "I wish I could remember." Xiao Zhan looked at him, tears glistening. It's okay if you don't. I'll remember for both of us. That night, as the city slept, Xiao Zhan painted again. He painted until dawn, until his tears became part of the canvas. Every stroke was a plea to time, to memory, to love. And miles away, Yibo lay awake, tossing and turning. In his dreams, fragments began to surface. Laughter in the rain, a rooftop conversation, a hand reaching out in the dark. He didn't know what it all meant yet, but when he woke, he felt one thing with unshakable certainty. He missed someone. Someone whose name he didn't yet remember, but whose soul he couldn't forget. And that's where their story truly begins. Two souls separated by memory, connected by something far deeper. Destiny. Because even when time steals memories, it can never steal the feeling of home. And for Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, home was always each other. Dizzy if you felt the emotion in this story. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more touching stories about Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo. Stories of love, fate, and the beautiful fragments that make us whole.